It was 6:25 a.m. on March 2nd. Suwar sat on the school bus by the window. A cacophony of voices and laughter swirled around her. The bus rumbled on, a metal beast carrying its cargo of teenagers to their destination. Suwar's ears were plugged, not just to her schoolmates' noisy chaos but to the whole world around her. Her favorite music was playing just for her. The music wasn't just sound, it filled the space around her with joy and belonging. The thumping rhythm resonated in her head. The lyrics was a voice she knew way better than her own. She followed along, moving her body to the melody where she sat. Ta. She thought, if only she could stand up and move her body to the beats, but she was on a bus. Still, she sang along, her voice lost in the roar of the chorus while the beat had her foot tapping a silent rhythm on the floor of the bus. She was living inside each chord and verse as it played on. She followed her favorite musicians on all the media, as it gave her a glimpse into their worlds beyond the songs. It was a way for her to feel closer to the artist she admired so much. She devoured, liked and shared every post and every story. Their songs were a form of emotional first aid when she was upset, or had mood swings, or when she was happy. She sang every and anywhere. Whenever she took a shower, her mother would often knock on the door, urging her to hurry up, for she always lingered too long, losing track of time as she busied herself with singing in the bathroom. Music gave her joy. When the school bus pulled to a stop and the doors opened, Suwar slipped the phone into a pocket in her backpack and smoothed the creases on her hijab. She was in an all-inclusive private school that allowed students to practice their faith freely. Her school's policy on phones were rigid. They were not allowed. The reasoning was that they were a distraction, a tool that pulled students away from their studies. Even under the school's strict regulations, she found a way to bring her phone with her. In another landscape, across the vast expanse of the globe, Ibrahima's life unfolded. Ibrahima was a boy of 19 who lived in a town on the eastern part of the globe. After completing his high school education with good grades, Ibrahima applied to a prestigious university to study architecture. He joined his grandfather at his carpentry workshop while waiting for the admission letter. The workshop was a place filled with rich scent of woods. He spent his days at the workshop, turning raw, unfinished timber into works of art. He worked alone today, as the other workers usually rested on Sundays. Ibrahima's head swayed, lips moving in silent harmony, his whole body pulsing with the beat. The unfinished bed frame before him was no longer just wood, it was an art piece. He barely heard the creak of the door as his grandfather stepped in. The older man reached across the bench and pressed the stop button. The sudden quiet seemed to swallow the air, leaving only the scent of sawdust and the sharp outline of disapproval in his grandfather's eyes. Ibrahima paused, and looked at the direction his grandfather stood. The echo of the song playing stubbornly in his chest, long after the music had been turned off. Music was Ibrahima's getaway. It lifted him from the heaviness of life endeavors and routine and carried him into a space where everything else dissolved into the background. His grandfather shook his head, his hands resting on the workbench. "I can't understand how you can enjoy so much noise. Let's go to the masjid. It is almost Maghrib," he said, his voice carrying more weariness than anger. To him, music was loud noise. The kind that pounded against the skull, a pounding that unsettled the mind and left a headache. But to Ibrahima the same sound gave him focus, joy, and a sense of belonging. Ibrahima locked up the workshop, brushing the dust of the day from his clothes. The tools lay still, waiting for tomorrow. He stepped out with his grandfather, as the evening call to prayer echoed through the streets. After Maghrib, he sat outside the masjid steps, as was his habit, the evening air cool against his skin. He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, and pressed play on his favorite playlist. The familiar rhythm filled his ears, carrying him away from the silence around him into a world that felt familiar. For Suwar and Ibrahima, music was the pulse that made the ordinary feel alive. Their world revolved around melodies and beats. They found shelter in music. They were strangers, but unknowingly part of the same invisible orchestra that pulled them to a similar fate. The orchestra of life didn't need them to meet. They were two souls navigating the happenings of the world by rhythms that meant everything to them. They moved through their days, each with music stitched into their very being. Suwar and Ibrahima sometimes wondered if anyone else in the world felt the way they did about music. And though they remained strangers, every note they loved, every song that lifted them was like a secret thread tying them to a similar fate, while they remained strangers in name and unaware of the other's existence. In truth, they were companions in fate and experience. Life went on for everyone. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Time progressed and life unraveled itself in its own intricate way. Something soon changed for Suor. It began subtly. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Especially at night, when she rose from bed to use the restroom, faint music drifted from the toilet. The rhythm was distinct, as if someone was playing a radio in the toilet. The sound unsettled her, yet it drew her attention every time. Sometimes the rhythm were familiar melodies and her mind sang along as though compelled without free will. It didn't stop there. She began to have strange dreams. Often, she found herself falling from rooftops, cliffs, or elevated surfaces, her heart racing in its rib cage even after waking. At other times, she wandered into gatherings of unfamiliar groups with their faces blurred. These dreams left her restless, as though they carried meanings beyond her grasp. Unknown to her, more would unfold later. She went on about her daily routine, as though nothing had changed. Each morning began the same. At school, she took her usual seat, answered questions when called upon, and nodded through conversations she barely heard. To everyone else, she seemed perfectly fine, steady, predictable, the same as always. Family gatherings came and went with their familiar rhythm, laughter that rose and fell like waves, the smell of food clinging to the air, the same stories retold as if they were sacred traditions. She smiled when expected, listened politely, and played her part in the comforting pattern of normal life. She even entertained. She would sing and dance, delighting some friends and relatives with her love for worldly music. Although her parents disapproved, she was headstrong and unafraid to follow her own desires. Yet beneath it all, she experienced abnormal happenings. She told no one. Not her parents, not her friends, not even the cousin who always noticed when something was off. How could she begin to explain the unusual patterns that was now her life, that sudden fracture in reality, that quiet moment when the world had become something else entirely? Words would only cheapen it, and disbelief would wound more than silence. So she kept it to herself. Across the distance, outside Ibrahima's home, the night was heavy with silence. Ibrahima lay sprawled on his bed, earphones still plugged in as he fell asleep. The music in his ears was dissolving into his dreams as his body gave into sleep. His phone screen dimmed, the playlist still shuffling between songs. He shifted slightly, one arm reaching for a pillow, his breathing slow and even between wakefulness and sleep. Then, without warning, a pressure crept over him, subtle at first, like a weight at the edge of the mattress. It grew, spreading across his chest, crushing the breath from his lungs. His eyes fluttered, trying to open, but his body refused to obey. His body was pinned by an invisible force. A presence loomed above him, immense and formless, pressing harder and holding him down. Every instinct told him to fight, to call out, but no sound escaped his lips. He felt touched without boundary. It was not the kind of touch that belonged to the physical world. It was deeper, unsettling, and consuming. He was entirely at the mercy of something far greater than himself. Something beyond human. Then the force dissolved. When it was finally over and his body was his own again, he lay there trembling, as his mind replayed the weight of what had just happened. He could feel the ache of fear and confusion running through his limbs. Moments passed, but he still lay wide awake because he was too scared to go back to sleep even though the night was still young. Fear clung to him like a second skin, making the thought of sleep unacceptable. Suor and Ibrahima continued experiencing the strange happenings. Though life around them moved on, they walked through it all with quiet apprehension. The strangeness of their individual experiences weighed heavily on their mind. It was unlike anything they could put into words, and even if they tried, who would believe them? People might dismiss it. Weary of misunderstanding, they kept it locked inside, carrying the secret alone. A force had chosen them. Yet, as heavy as this weight was, something worse soon followed. One Saturday morning, as Suor took her bath, she leaned back in the tub, letting the heat soak into her tired body, her eyes half closed in a fragile moment of calm. Then, suddenly, the calm shattered. There was the faintest sensation, unmistakable, of fingers brushing against her skin. The touch was too deliberate to be imagined. It startled her.
The story does not end here. The rest would unfold in the next part. Also, have you ever wondered why certain songs seem to touch something deeper than sound? And do you believe that songs carry a force we cannot see but can feel? Something spiritual in disguise.
Before we uncover what happens next, please like, subscribe, and share. Big moments are just ahead. Thanks for watching.